What do Caribbean islands, Ethiopian churches and Bob Marley all have in common? And people there really believed that this man, the man prophesied by Marcus Garvey to come, was a sign that times were changing for them. And this is why Haile Selassie, Zion, comes from. This is the promised land of Africa. Zion as well. Babylon is then the obverse of Zion as well. Now there's a reason that Ethiopia has such a prominent position in all of this, and for Rastafaris, and I will explain why. What do Caribbean islands, Ethiopian churches and Bob Marley all have in common? We've all heard of Rastafarians, but how many of us actually know what they believe? Now Rastafarianism is actually one of the Abrahamic religions, alongside Islam, Christianity and Judaism, to name the three large ones in the group. They can all be broken down into their respective divisions and sects. The Rastafari belief set draws mostly from Christian teachings and scriptures, although it's quite a traditionalist, literalist reading of the scriptures, so it does have certain features more in common with Judaism as well. Jah is a very important term and is the Rastafari word for God. It is actually a shortening of Jehovah, which is one of the names of God in Hebrew. Rastology is this particular Rastafari interpretation of the Bible, which is quite traditionalist and literalist. For example, most Rastafari people, or Rastas as they are shortly known as, do not eat pork because it's forbidden in Leviticus, as well as then wearing dreadlocks, which are very famous because it says in Leviticus not to take the knife to the skin, etc. And this Rastology also is often interpreted by these people as meaning that black people were the chosen race of God, the chosen people, and one of the tribes of Israel. Livity is another word that is used, and it's the Rastafari way of life. Now often they try to live naturally in a most natural way possible, often going back to patriarchal structures of society, as well as then wearing the dreadlocks and not following certain societal conformities. Now this all goes back to a man named Marcus Garvey, who was a big inspiration for the Rastafari movement. He was a Pan-Africanist and also believed that Africans should feel more empowered in the modern world. And it's thanks to his teachings coming to Jamaica in the 1930s that the descendants of slaves started to form what would become the Rastafari movement. The Ethiopianist movement was a movement that also very much influenced the Rastafaris, who would go on to take this idea much further, and was essentially that black churches often felt that they were too much under the control of white people at the time, and so they looked to Ethiopia, where there was an Ethiopian Orthodox church that had been run by black people for millennia, and they tried to emulate this. This was on top of also Pan-African ideas, which were seeking the empowerment and further civil rights for black people and the African diaspora as a whole. This was often met with this idea of repatriation to Africa, of sending black people who were in the Caribbean and North America, as well as other parts of the world, and who had been taken there as slaves, to send their descendants back to Africa as some kind of promised land. And this is where another term used in Rastafari circles, Zion, comes from. This is the promised land of Africa. Zion actually originally means Jerusalem, but in the Rastafari context it's used for Africa, although sometimes more specifically as Ethiopia specifically. As well, Babylon is then the obverse of Zion. Babylon in the Bible, of course, is where the Jews are sent in exile as slaves under the Babylonians, and so Babylon in a Rastafari context are the oppressive Western lands where they believe black people are being oppressed and that they should return to Africa, their promised land. Especially Ethiopia as well. Now there's a reason that Ethiopia has such a prominent position in all of this, and for Rastafaris, and I will explain why. Now again, it goes back to Marcus Garvey, because he said in 1920, "Look to Africa, when a black king shall be crowned, for the day of deliverance is at hand." And just a decade later, when a man named Haile Selassie became the emperor of Ethiopia, many Africans believed that this prophecy had indeed come true. Now, within 5 years, the Italians had invaded Haile Selassie's Ethiopian Empire in the Second Italo-Ethiopian War, and although they fought bravely, eventually the Ethiopians, using largely spears and swords against the Italians' tanks and heavy machine guns, were defeated after a bitter struggle. However, Haile Selassie and the British would return in 1941 during the North Africa campaigns of the Second World War, and together they were able to defeat the Italian colonizers there, and he was able to reclaim the Ethiopian throne. Now, all of this, and especially the Time magazine's articles of his coronation, all reached Jamaica, and people there really believed that this man, the man prophesied by Marcus Garvey to come, was a sign that times were changing for them. And this is why Haile Selassie gets such a prominent position in the Rastafari movement. And actually, the very name Rastafari isn't actually the name of the movement. Originally, it was the name of Haile Selassie, because Ras is the Ethiopian word for the kind of lord or head, and he was known as Tafari Makonnen. So his name is actually now the name of the movement that came to worship him in that form. Now, actually, just after this, many people in Jamaica who associated with the Rasta movement tried to seize the towns of Kingston and Spanish Town and add it to this new Ethiopian empire, thinking that the time had come for them. However, these were violently put down by the authorities at the time. However, when Jamaica became independent in 1962, I'm great with dates, relations somewhat eased with the Rastafari population inside Jamaica, and actually they were able to forge the Jamaican government with the Ethiopian Empire good relations because of the worship of Haile Selassie as the second coming of Christ, or the second incarnation of Christ, or a prophet of Jah, depending on the interpretation by the Rastafari people in question, leading to his state visit to Jamaica in 1966, where tens, possibly hundreds of thousands of people came to watch him land in Kingston, and they surrounded his aircraft and really thought that the Messiah had landed in Jamaica.